The earth held its breath in KwaZulu-Natal, a parched and ancient thing waiting for the first drops of a promised storm. This was a truth Thabo Maseko understood in his bones, a universal reflection as old as the hills that cradled his village. Thabo, a man of 22, was a shepherd of men and beasts, his skin a testament to the unforgiving sun, his eyes holding the profound wisdom of a lineage carved into the very soil. In the quiet rhythm of his life, a rhythm dictated by the seasons and the sacredness of his ancestors, an alien sound began to echo. It was not a whisper, but a promise, carried on the winds of a colonial ambition he could not yet comprehend. It was a call for labor, a promise of a better life, and a wage that would honor his clan. But he would soon learn that this promise was as fragile as a drop of water on a hot stone. He stood by the kraal, the scent of cattle and wood smoke a familiar comfort, a stark contrast to the sterile, bureaucratic air of the recruiting tent. A young British officer, crisp in his uniform, spoke of duty and opportunity, of a war far away, a war of lions and cannons that needed men of strength. Thabo saw in this call not a march to glory, but a chance to bring prosperity to his people, to live up to the legacy of warriors like Shaka. His loyalty to his community and Zulu traditions was the anchor he held on to, the foundation of his unshakable sense of duty to his people and his ancestors. His motivation was not simply survival, but the deep-seated desire to ensure his family's future, a future untethered from the immediate struggles of their land. The journey to the coast was a jarring sensory overload. For a man who understood the language of the land and its creatures, the thrum of the train was a monstrous, metallic roar. The sight of the bustling port city with its towering ships and strange faces was a shock to his soul. The vast, unending expanse of the ocean, a force of nature even more immense than the Veld he knew, was both terrifying and mesmerizing. It was on this journey that he first began to understand the scale of the world and his place within it, or rather the lack thereof. The ship that carried him and thousands of other black South African men to France was a world of its own, a floating microcosm of the brutal segregation that defined their lives. Upon disembarking, the promised land was nothing more than a series of desolate compounds surrounded by 6-foot-high barbed wire fences, their movements restricted and guarded. The air, heavy with the stench of sweat, mud, and unnameable European smells, clung to them, a chilling premonition of the cold that would soon seep into their bones. Thabo and his companions were confined, forbidden from interacting with Europeans, their movements rigidly controlled. The purpose was clear: to maintain a strict disciplinary regime and prevent any familiarity between Europeans and natives. They were not soldiers, they were laborers, and their humanity was being systematically stripped away. This first act of a brutal epic had begun, and with it, the slow, agonizing erosion of Thabo's hope. The promise of glory had dissolved into the grim reality of servitude, and the universal suffering of war was only beginning to reveal its face. The days bled into one another, marked by the rhythmic, back-breaking labor of the South African Native Labor Corps, SANLC. Thabolu's strong back, once used to guiding cattle, now strained under the weight of heavy ammunition and supplies for the front lines, a grueling existence that was a constant assault on his soul. The world of the trenches was a quagmire of mud and despair, a labyrinthine hell where the line between life and death was thin and hope was a distant memory. The sticky mud clung to his boots and rose to his knees, a physical manifestation of the war's relentless grasp, making every step a monumental effort. The air was a putrid cocktail of metallic blood, wet earth, and the nauseating odor of decomposing bodies and excrement, a visceral experience that he would never forget. The distant, muffled groans of the wounded were a constant soundtrack to his work, each one a stark reminder of the anonymity of death. Among the many faces, Corporal Jabulani, an older, more pragmatic man of the SANLC, became Thabolu's silent mentor and anchor. Jabulani's eyes, wrinkled by the African sun and now by the European fog, carried the resignation of a life of submission, but also a deep love for his family. His motivation was a simple, powerful desire for survival and a return home, a reality he accepted with a heavy heart. He offered practical advice and a sense of shared suffering, a shoulder for Thabo to lean on, and most importantly, a connection to the world they had left behind. In the evenings, huddled together against the cold, the men would sing in isiZulu, their voices a temporary bridge to their homeland, a collective expression of their shared suffering and resilience. These moments were small acts of defiance against the dehumanization they faced, a way to maintain their cultural identity in a world that sought to erase it. The sound of Thabo's soul letter in isiZulu, a private conversation with his ancestors, rustled in his pocket, a powerful reminder of what he was fighting for. The discontentment among the SANLC was considerable. They faced segregation, poor food, and the constant threat of attack from German planes with no means of defense. News of the SS Mendi disaster, where over 600 African lives were lost at sea, reached them like a death knell, a brutal confirmation of their expendability. This event, briefly recognized with a minute of silence, was a visceral lesson in the value placed on their lives, a message that shook Thabo's hope to its core. The war was not just an external fight against an enemy, but an internal battle against a system that refused to see him as a man, let alone a warrior. The weight on his shoulders was no longer just the munitions, but the crushing weight of invisibility and the pain of seeing his brothers die without a name or a memorial. The advance to Ypres was a descent into the deepest circle of the white hell. The landscape, a perpetual canvas of gray, was a testament to a world turned upside down. The trenches were a maze of death, a far cry from the open veld of Thabo's home, a cold, watery purgatory that felt like a cruel antithesis to his native land. Thabo's labor intensified, carrying supplies that fueled the war machine, and, more painfully, the inert bodies of fallen soldiers, both white and African, whose lives had been extinguished with brutal anonymity. The constant proximity to combat was a silent torture, the pain of being unable to defend himself a silent burning fire within him. He was a man of warrior heritage, a descendant of a powerful empire builder, but here he was forbidden to carry a weapon. This contrast between his rich heritage and his current reality intensified his pain and frustration. Then came the gas. The German barrage arrived with a low, hissing sound, a sibilant whisper of impending doom. The air filled with a pale green, menacing cloud, the smell of pineapple and pepper that burned his nostrils and seared his lungs. Later, a new gas, phosgene, an odor of musty hay, would silently fill the air, its deadly effects taking up to 48 hours to manifest, causing fluid buildup in the lungs. Thabo witnessed a whole regiment decimated, the screams of the dying mingling with the deafening roar of explosions and the sight of contorted, swollen bodies in the mud. He saw his brothers fall, their faces nameless, their deaths unrecognized, a sight that echoed the tragedy of the Mendi. In that moment of absolute despair, as the chaos raged around him, Thabo reached his turning point. The dignity he had so carefully guarded shattered, replaced by a searing fury and an unshakable resolve. The white hell had claimed his friends, his innocence, and his peace, but it would not claim his soul. Lying half submerged in the mud, he saw it.
a discarded rifle, a forbidden symbol of power and agency. It was a tool of the very system that denied him his humanity, but in his hands it became something else entirely. With a deliberate and defiant act, he picked it up, feeling its cold weight as a physical manifestation of his decision. This was not a surrender, but a silent rebellion, an affirmation of his dignity and a refusal to die in anonymity. The act was a rejection of the role assigned to him and a declaration of his own will.
The rifle felt cold and heavy in Thabo's hands, a foreign object that was now a powerful symbol of his newfound resolve. Immediately, an urgent primal need to connect with his roots consumed him. He found a small, waterlogged piece of paper, and, with hands that were firm with purpose, he wrote his only letter in isiZulu, addressed to an ancestor. This was not a lament or a cry for pity, but a profound ritual of connection to the spiritual world of his Amadlozi ancestors. The letter was a plea for justice, not for mercy, a powerful prayer for strength and validation for his decision to fight. He invoked the strength of his warrior ancestors like Shaka, contrasting his rich heritage with the brutal prohibition of his colonial masters. This act, the act of a man reclaiming his spiritual and cultural self, was more powerful than any weapon. The authorities, represented by a young British officer named Lieutenant Davies, eventually discovered Thabo's act of rebellion. Davies, fresh from the military academy, initially saw Thabo and the other carriers as native labor, a simple cog in the vast war machine. But he had been a witness to the unshakable resilience and quiet suffering of the men of the SANLC, a resilience that defied his preconceived notions. He had seen Thabo's quiet strength and the courage of his companions, men who faced danger with no means of defense. Now, confronted with Thabo's defiance, a crack formed in his armor of prejudice. The young officer saw not a rebel, but a man of honor, and began to question the very system he was meant to uphold. His internal conflict and evolution from a distant figure to a respectful observer represented the possibility of a change of perspective amid the barbarism of war. The pursuit was not a simple chase of a deserter, but a clash of two worlds, two perspectives, and two very different definitions of honor. For the British, Thabo was a deserter, a threat to military discipline. For Thabo, his act was a sacred duty, a promise to the forgotten dead, and a stand for his people. He was forced into a desperate flight, a new kind of battle where he was both a hero to some and a rebel to others. The other members of the SANLC, a diverse group of men with their own stories and pains, served as a chorus, amplifying Thabo's voice and showing that his search for justice was a shared longing among the many who had been forgotten by history. Thabo's story, whether he survived or fell, became a legend whispered among the men of the SANLC. It was a narrative of quiet courage, a testament to the unyielding spirit of a people forced into a role of invisibility. If he survived, his return to South Africa would be a journey of continuous struggle for recognition. He would not be the same man who left, his soul forever marked by the white hell. He would become a voice for the invisible, those who served and died without glory, a catalyst for the rewriting of history. His story, told through the raw emotional power of storytelling, would ensure that the sacrifice of the black soldiers was finally recognized and celebrated. This pursuit for justice, for memory, for a place in history, was a long and arduous journey, culminating in a formal recognition decades later. Thabo's existence would be a powerful embodiment of the fact that history is not just a collection of facts, but a tapestry of individual stories, each thread of which holds a human soul. If he fell in combat, his story would not be lost. It would be carried home by those who knew him, by his companion, Jabulani, or by Lieutenant Davies, a man forever changed by witnessing Thabo's transformation. His legacy would be the inspiration for a new generation to seek truth and justice, to ensure that the sacrifice of their people was not lost to the annals of history. The very act of telling his story, a story of a Zulu pastor who became a warrior in a foreign land, was a form of justice in itself. The narrative concludes with a profound, universal reflection on memory, justice, and the unwavering human quest for dignity in the face of war. It is not a tale of a grand victory, but a powerful exploration of the costs of conflict on the individual soul. The final image is not of a man with a rifle, but an old man, perhaps Jabulani, sitting by a fire in KwaZulu-Natal. He speaks of the white hell and the man who dared to be more than a footnote. His audience is a group of young people, their faces illuminated by the firelight, absorbing the story with solemn reverence. The story is a call to action, an invitation to reflect on their own lives and the importance of giving a voice to the forgotten. It is a story that refuses to be silenced, echoing across time, reminding us that true heroism is not always found on the battlefield, but often in the quiet, defiant acts of those who refuse to be erased. The purpose of this narrative, like Thabo's journey, is to deepen the audience's worldview and seek meaning, reinforcing that the impulse to narrate is as universal as culture itself.